and then loop back. I don't know if those are really one issue or two separate issues, but yeah, do we have a preference for which one to start with?
Meaning the yarn or the TS path thing?
Why don't we maybe just start with the yarn one? Because I think we were talking about that first in the comments. So, and then we can move on to the other one. Bradley, do you want to start the recording, or have you already? Oh, you already
should be going.
All right. Thank you. All right. This is the September 21st meeting of the Node Loaders Group. Mayal, do you want to introduce what you're facing with yarn?
Sure. So I'm working on the Yarn project, and one of the things that we are working on is a plug and play, which is resolution strategy a bit novel, where files are resolved from zip archives within the Yarn cache instead of being inside the non-modules. So for CommonJS, the way it works is that we patch the require function, but for ESM, it's different since it needs to have a formal API. So that's why I'm here. We have worked in order to implement first version of the loader. Currently, it supports the old API. So before the refactoring that got landed last week, I think, of GetSource. So my plan was to show you a bit what we've been doing and to raise a few particular pain points that we have encountered, and see what you think about all this. Sounds good? Okay. So I will share my screen quickly. I don't know if you've seen the link. I shared it on the issue. So you can follow the peer on your end if you prefer. Do you see my screen?
I can see it.
Yes.
Okay. So we need to do two things in the Yarn resolver. The first one is that we are handling the resolution of the bare identifiers into the path on the file system where the packages are installed. And the separate one is being able to read the files from the zip archives. One of our main issues, so we have two issues with that. So this is the resolve function. First, we try to add everything that is that is required to support the file protocol. Then we try to match with the bare identifier, and we pass that to the PNP API that resolve to unqualified function. So something to understand about the way PNP works is that we only care about resolving the bare identifier name. So for example, let's say that you're loading lodash / is unique. We only care about resolving the lodash part into a folder on the file system. Everything else, for example, resolving is unique to is unique / index.js, something like this, is something that we don't technically care about and that we usually only have to do because we don't have another way of making Node do it for us. So in this particular case, we try to resolve the package name into a folder on the file system. So that's what we do here. And after that, we still need to call resolve request, which is going to make the resolution of the index.js with all the extensions, all the index, all the exports field, in order to return the path to a file. So that's the first thing that was not great for us, is that we need to re-implement a lot of the resolution just because even if we only care about a small part of it, we still needed to replace everything that we had removed by introducing our own hook. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Can you clarify the extensions, it looks like you only ever turn it on to match experimental specifier resolution. Is
And
there any other
79,
use
is
of
that
it?
what you're looking at?
Sorry?
Like, are you looking at
Okay.
line 79, Bradley?
Yeah, 79 and 80. Do you ever do any extension modification versus? So in common JS, you could add arbitrary extensions. You could add .css, for example. Do you ever
Yeah.
do that? It looks like here you only do it to match the experimental specifier resolution equals node.
Yes, because by default, I think to remember that ESM doesn't make the extension resolution, right?
Correct, it doesn't.
Yeah, I
And
think
so-
they're just trying to like replicate what Node is doing, but not like extend upon it with like custom resolution.
All right. That's all I
Like
wanted to know.
that was the TS node request where like they wanted to add .ts to the as like one of the searched extensions. But sounds like that's not something that like Yarn is doing.
No, usually I think with TS node. So we are using the required extension underscore extension. I think it's this name in order
Yeah,
to know
required
what are the
extensions.
extensions. Yeah, we are using this field in order to know what are the extensions that should be used. We are doing that in the common.js loader. I don't remember if we are doing that in the ESM loader. But usually we try to support other projects themselves patching the file system in order to add their own extension, at least in CGS. So here the main issue that we have is that even though we only care about one specific part of the resolution, so only bare identifier, we still need to provide the full resolution because that's how the hook works. It's just one result function.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like we could, I don't think we necessarily need to make more hooks. I think we could like just give you kind of utility functions to collapse some of all this logic that you have inside here.
Yes and no, because the problem is that if there is another loader that needs to hook into one part of the resolution, we cannot just call the node helpers because we will need something that will call the other loaders. For example, let's say that you have one loader that is adding support for .ts files or extensions, and you have the yarn loader that only cares about the bare identifier. If the yarn loader was to call the node helpers, it would bypass the TypeScript loader that would look for the TS extension. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the whole problem, the whole reason we collapsed the loaders down to resolve and load is because like we can't have many loaders in order to have chaining, like exactly the same problem you're just talking about. Like if get format or transform source were to be chainable, like if they still existed and we were going to allow chaining for them, then it would like there would be these issues of like, well, one loader might do a translation in get source and another one does it in transform source, and now it's all screwed up because like it's the chaining doesn't quite work the way the user would expect it to. So that's why we like collapse it to as few as possible. It's almost like you're going to need to implement your own, like if you want, if say within resolve, like say you just took the entire resolution of node and dropped it into your resolve hook, like just copy pasted it, which I'm obviously you don't want to do, but like, just for sake of argument, let's say what you did, say that you
That's
did that.
mostly what the resolve request is currently.
Yeah, exactly. So then like you would need, like you would need to then be able to look for you would need to provide your own like hook stuff, just like the way you're currently looking into require.extensions.
But if it was the yarn loader that was exposing hooks, then people would come to us and tell us that, yeah, but it's not a standard, so we are not going to support this because it's not standard. So you are broken if you need special code to do.
So,
Yeah.
so I think there's maybe just some contention here about finding a middle ground for utility hooks that aren't called by JavaScript syntax. So like Mile was saying, he needs essentially composition of this utility across multiple loaders. But it is completely possible that no loader ever calls this utility. That's
which utility?
possible. Whatever does basically Node's default resolve operation, but in a way that's parameterized, that lets you pass extensions up. And if it gets to the default, it'll perform the resolution. So.
Yeah, I mean, leaving aside the like how to play nice with other loaders question for a second, I mean, the first thought I had was like, yes, we should certainly be able to make a bunch of utility functions so that he doesn't have to copy paste the Node code base into his loader. I was also thinking we should be able to like maybe rewrite our utility functions a little bit from however they are in the Node code base to make them non-file system dependent whenever possible. So like resolve request could take as input, well, maybe not resolve request, but like one of the functions could take as input, say, not just the path to a package.json, but like the expected contents of a package.json, as well as the expected contents of like an FS reader call, so that way it could do the resolution entirely in memory without hitting the file system. And that way these files don't necessarily need to actually be there.
I think in one of the issues I saw reference about like in TypeScript, you have this host function that this host object that contains a bunch of implementations that allows you to check whether a file exists, to get the file content, this kind of thing. Wouldn't it something that would also work for loaders, where each loader would be able to mutate these hosts potentially by wrapping the function with their own implementation to extend them, while still being able to call the original.
Well, this is like proxying like fs.read file. In other words, I think that was raised as a suggestion by someone, and a bunch of people were not in favor of that. Like,
so just to be clear, we're only not a fan of doing a lookup on a mutated built-in. Nobody is so far, to my knowledge, objected to providing a host object or something that lets you rewrite how FS works in a specific context. Yeah.
Well, so like say he wants to proxy fs.read file and fs.read file sync. I gather that he's like, because of the way Node's kind of clamped down its internals, like if he were to proxy it, Node internals would never use his proxy version, but we could make it so that like if he proxies it, it gets used by other loaders and by user application code. Is that possible?
I mean, we could let you do it. I mean, that's essentially what loaders are. We're talking about, instead of import instrumentation, file system instrumentation. We could certainly do that through a loaders API. It's just a bunch of new hooks. And one of the things this has been brought up before under the term resource APIs and resource hooks. I think it's also been called asset hooks by Facebook, if you want to search those. Basically, there's a bunch of cases where people don't want to have real files on disk. They want the files to live either within the executable itself, in a zip file somewhere, in very different cases on a database. They want the FS API to work with these things. Nobody's
Mm.
really done design work on it, but you can do it. We just don't want to have the runtime mutation by JavaScript that is able to be mutated by anything, any kind of potential attack vector from third-party code. We don't want that. But providing a
But the-
first-class way is perfectly fine.
I was
The
at least
loader-
looking into this. So I looked into the resolve.js file and tried to divide it by where is it accessing the file system and where is it not. So
Ooh, yeah,
and try to go through all that code. And there's two ways you can do this. Either you can kind of provide your own implementations of does file exist and so on. There's a few of those that are in that actually some utility methods like file exists. That's one. You can, if you can send that into something and that would be used instead, that's one way. The other way would be that you expose some utility methods and you try to do all the file system loading on the outside, and more like you have like if you know the concept of we have pure functions in the core, like and you have the side effects in like a shell outside. So you try to, the loader will be the shell that is kind of doing all the loading from the file system and inputting that to pure functions more or less that are kind of handling the results. So I can show the code later for that, what I ended up with a little bit. But there's, I mean, these are the two main ways to do it. Either you want to send in some implementations for does file exist or load package JSON. This is one. Or you want to kind of load your package JSON and then call into some utility function with the result that you loaded, and you get some result back from the utility function. You continue to process, you load some more, you probe for more files maybe, and then you put that into another utility function and get some result back. Does that make sense?
yeah, but it suffers the composition problem that we were talking about earlier, where like if TypeScript supports reading, for example, from like some compiled form, and then you have another thing, I don't know what, something that reads from zip archives, and you send in only one of those utility functions, then the read file only works on one of those cases, and that's problematic. All of this is kind of leading towards like, you do need hooks for these things, I believe personally. But I don't think they go in resolve. I think you want a full file system hook for this. There
Yeah,
aren't
I
too
mean,
many file system operations that the loaders do.
Well,
could
I think that
figure
this is definitely like raising the question of what they are. Like it would be good to document, because I know Resolve does a bunch of file system calls as parts of its work. So it would be good to. I mean, I guess we should. I guess the algorithm that's in the docs probably says when it looks on the file system, but it's kind of probably pervasive.
So
Yeah, I looked
it's
into that. So
vague.
I also, one concern could be the performance. I mean, if you directly check for files, you could probably get a little bit better performance than if you return something and then check for like the one that checks for the file endings and stuff like that. You have this legacy resolve in the middle that if, I think it is because if a module imports a common JS file, you still need to do the legacy resolve of the main field and check for the file extensions in that case. And that will probe the file system for all the files. And I would not like it to do that like imperatively, like, but I want to do that on the outside. So I get a list of files to check for and I do the checking maybe. Or the other way would be to send in a function, file exists function from the outside.
Yeah, I think either way works. But I think what we could do is make some sort of actionable list of hooks we want. It seems like there's some specific file operation hooks we want to do. And then basically within loaders, I don't think we do it to the common JS loader, at least not for a while. Where if your loader had a like file exists hook or something, it would be called only under certain conditions, like using file URLs, but it would actually call out to those hooks. And then whatever chaining model happens, you can chain it as necessary. Yeah, but I think there are four different ones that are really necessary right now. There's reading files. It might not be synchronous, so probably don't call it synchronous. There's checking for existence, which we usually do by just reading. We don't do a separate exist check usually, because that's just slower. And then
In
there's
CGS, there is a function for that.
there's a
there's a-
function for that. I don't think we do that for most file ops in the
Yeah,
ESM.
it's like not
There's a
really,
lot of file exist for it does a stat, I think, somewhere. Mm.
Stat,
At least
yes,
in
because
the-
it
in
needs
the
to know if it's a
docs, it's-
directory.
yeah, in the docs, it's not really, it encourages you to just do read file inside try catch rather than two separate calls for file exists, then if so, read it.
It's a lot faster. It's very significantly faster to just try to read the file and have it fail.
So the
But
file
yeah.
exist function is doing stat sync.
Yes,
I
so
think in some of those helper functions, like specifically around package stuff, I don't know what it's actually linking to, but I believe inside of them, there are many things called like exists. So maybe we should
yes,
change that.
we could change that. But it looks
I
like the
mean-
only ones we're using are real pathing, statting, and reading.
I guess the question is it feasible to refactor resolve to not use file system calls? Like I'm trying to think how would that even be
Yeah.
possible?
It wouldn't
like,
be
I think-
hard.
Like you'd have, well, but you'd have to almost like before any resolution happens, you'd have to like crawl the whole file system from the entry point down into the node modules folder and every subfolder of that recursively all the way down to get like every package.json so that you have them all in memory. And then you can start resolve because it would have everything in memory of what exists on the file system.
Why can't it just call back?
That's the approach I had. I injected, there's one function in resolve that's called package resolve, I think. And that is used by, it's called by the import resolve and the export resolve. So I made the import resolve and export resolve receive that function as a callback, and then I could implement it by my own on the outside. Most of the file system access happens actually in that file, in that package resolve function.
Yeah. But like if we don't want to read it all ahead of time, policies do read it all ahead of time, but they are lazy. They don't do everything ahead of time. Basically, when you encounter something on disk, or a request to find something on disk, you just call out, just like a loader hook does right now. You encounter an import that could be from the command line, the first argument passed to node. It could be in source text, an import statement, dynamic or static, but that's when you actually perform the operation. So I think, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Jonas?
Jonas, yeah, that's right.
Okay, I think his approach of like having some way to call out for a instrumentation function to be called
Here's
is simple.
I mean, that would be fine. There's just a problem with that. It's like it has the same problem as get format does, where like if every loader that you're using uses this like say package resolve hook that's part of resolve, then they play nice with each other, and like any hooks that you create within package resolve are honored. But all it takes is one of your loaders to handle a resolve hook and ignore the package resolve hook, and it just gets ignored. Like, you know what I mean? Like then you've got loaders that aren't playing nice to each other. That's why we collapse these, so that that wouldn't happen with get format. You know, does
Is
that make
this
sense?
something that we could use global preload for? Because that runs before any of these hooks happen. So if you need to like change some things, then it seems like that would be the place to
I
do
mean, I
it.
think that's for changing things in like application code, not changing things in like
Yeah.
other loaders.
That's not for changing how internals work. No amount of older node contributors are going to be okay with you changing how internals work, because it's just a minefield of security issues. But like, there's
Because like I know if
even
you set
with
a variable or
things,
something
I
in
don't
there,
think
it's
it would be
available
like
to
a
reload.
git package hook. I think you would just write the stat hook, the read file hook, whatever we call it, probably not read file, probably not sync. The stat read file, what was the other one? Stat read file and real path. If you just implement those three things as hooks, I don't think they suffer the same problem as git format, because you can still pass it up to
Well,
next
they
loader.
wouldn't suffer the same problem if what you're doing is actually overriding their FS equivalents. Like
Yep.
if you're
think that's
actually
just a
patching
caveat.
fs.refile, essentially, but only for loaders and application code. You know,
Well, I
then
don't know
it's
why
like
it would
another
just be,
loader that uses read file would, you know,
I mean, you could just call out to your parent loader to get those hooks.
yeah, but the point is like
Like you
other
can,
hooks.
it would always just be the default implementation of Node. So if there are only one loader, just call out to the default implementation to see what its result for real path, stat sync, or read file would be. If there's another loader, good on them, whatever they return is what you work with.
I mean, I haven't really considered the chaining of the loaders. That seems
Well,
very,
that's the worst part. That's
yeah, it seems a
where
bit
things fall apart.
That's why
Yes.
we collapsed the loaders in the first place. Like if we weren't trying to implement chaining, we wouldn't have collapsed like the 4 loaders into 2. And very likely we would just be like adding new hooks left and right. But yeah, it's the chaining that kills everything.
Can't the first loader be able to impact the resolution of the, for example, FS module? Then the next loader, by importing FS, would fall into whatever the previous loader injected instead, and that
Well,
would
yeah,
pass
that's
that
what I was just saying, that like if it's actually overriding the real FS module, I mean, it wouldn't be overriding it within Node's internals. It would only be overriding it within like user supplied code, but that user supplied code could be,
Why wouldn't it
Loader.
change Node's internals?
because that's what people would object to. I
No,
thought,
they've
because of
objected
security.
to you like reflectively taking a function off a object in JavaScript and replacing it with your own. They
Well, I
haven't
think that's what
objected
it-
to like completely altering how it works.
What?
You
How are
can
those-
I'm
Yeah.
How are
not
those
seeing
not the
difference
same
here.
thing?
so one causes a security problem and one doesn't.
But why?
Basically,
Like how are they not the
because
same?
if yeah, so they're very, very, very horrifyingly different in the security field. So basically in one, any third-party code that runs at any time, if it can get a hold of FS, can basically start reading arbitrary things on disk, which is a big no-no in security. With loaders, we've we forced them to execute before any user code, and they're very limited. If you have that set up, you can basically know that any third-party code that runs at application time, basically once global preload code runs, can't change the hooks. It can't change the behavior of the loader. And that's kind of why we're having this talk, because this old way of doing things that just kind of let people have the file system be mutated at runtime was really concerning. And so when we wrote the ESM loader back in like 2015, we intentionally made it really hard for people to kind of have a third-party library change how file reading works. Now, if you're a host, if you're a user, we don't really ever want to prevent you from doing stuff. We just want to prevent the security problems that happen basically from arbitrary code. Because we live in the NPM ecosystem, people download lots of libraries. They don't always know what they're downloading. And we don't want those random libraries to be able to own you.
Okay, so what would actually happen here then? You're talking about how FS under the hood is not actually JavaScript. It goes to like some, I don't know, C++ thing.
For now, yeah,
and
sure.
so we're saying that, yeah. Well, I mean, we could talk about Rust or whatever later. So you're saying that you would basically just change the facade of FS, not the stuff behind it.
So there's a binding internal FS
Right.
that's all over the node code base. We only want to change internal FS. We don't want to read off public FS. Yeah, that would work fine. And then all nodes core should, in theory, use the modified form. And we just do that kind of what we do with the ESM loader, just replace the hooks. But they never get replaced once user code starts running.
I thought replacing the internal one that Node uses would be the security one.
No, the public one's the security nightmare.
I don't understand why, because we would replace it with JavaScript code.
Yep.
But
is it because Node's internals can be trusted?
Roughly, yeah. So we know what our guarantees are from the internal side. But if a public facing thing replaces our internals, we no longer know what guarantees there are.
Oh, okay. I understand. I got it. So you're saying like if you were to call FS directly, this would not be the changed one. It would only be if Node internally does something that is going to call FS, then it would use the changed one.
The public facing one, when it calls out to the internal one, could still be changed. That's fine. The problem is only that basically as application code runs, the general thought on the security model for Node.js is once user provided code runs for an application, so not things under -- require in particular, once the application code starts running, all code is considered untrusted. So this is after loader startup,
are not,
after --
loaders
require.
are not untrusted.
Loaders are
even
not
though-
untrusted, nor are -- requires. So
But
there's
that's still like kind of user land.
so to an extent, but it must be provided by the application on the command line. That's the thing. You can't
Like you have to be a lot
manipulate
more,
this.
you have to be a lot more explicit about importing it rather than it being like some dependency of another dependency of another dependency somewhere in your node.
Nested
models.
dependencies can't put you in the preload life cycle.
Couldn't loaders just patch the FS models then directly? Because
mean,
from what you
we
say, it's not a
could.
user.
We could, but I don't want to make guarantees about what the FS module is going to be used in loaders. Because if we start adding new APIs on it, or if we stop using the synchronous versions, that's breakage. So I don't want to commit to saying we will always call real path sync, never async.
No, I understand, but if we just say that the FS model can be patched by loaders, even if you don't make any promise. For example, let's say that you say that all functions are fair games to use in any loader, then people who would want to patch things would have to support it on all the functions. But that's practically what we do for YAM, for example. So that wouldn't be a problem for us.
That's not a problem for you because you're already doing that, but that's a high ask for most people.
I would say that that's a kind of a not implicit contract. You want a more explicit contract, what you're supposed to do as a loader.
Yeah, and we already have abstractions for most of these. So it's really just, we need these three things, whatever we want to call these methods. And we just need, when Node does internal FS operations, we could choose if it's scoped only to loading operations or if it's to the whole application. Instead of going out and using the normal internal binding, use call out to this instrumentation trusted code version, which I think is fine. It avoids the scare for a bunch of the older maintainers about not knowing exactly what we will break if we modify internals, or not knowing what you have to do to even use this. We did this with the embedder API roughly too. The embedder API does have a way of intercepting all FS calls. This is just doing it at the JavaScript layer instead of C++.
I mean, it sounds like it would work, but it also sounds like the list could grow and grow and grow. No, because there'll be something else that somebody needs.
I feel like you're gonna end up needing to provide proxy ability and chaining ability for every function that's off of FS.
Yeah.
Only for the ones that Node needs to use internally, which is currently 3. And it's been that way for years.
Okay.
The only
too bad.
Yeah, the only concern is really with things like HTTPS loaders and data loaders, they aren't going to go through this API. It's only going to be on file URLs. And requiring things to go through file URLs is not cheap. File URLs are kind of expensive to parse and generate if you do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. So we need to figure out a not expensive way to delegate that. If it's only in the loading path, it's probably not a problem. If it's in the application path, every file system operation for these 3 goes through it, that would be difficult to get through the people who want perf on Node. But loading a file is slow anyway, so who knows?
So you're going to use the drop in the pond argument?
I mean, when the drop is under 0.1% of the total cost, sure.
Okay, well, yeah, then it sounds like splitting hairs at that point. Okay. I mean, yeah, it sounds like it would work.
All right, so we're nearing the end of the time. So could we maybe talk about what the next steps would be? It sounds like someone would have to write some kind of design doc explaining what's desired, and then we can iterate on that. Is that
Yeah,
on like the next step?
yeah, we just need a design doc of like, these are the hooks that nodes going to internally call out to.
All right. Maybe Bradley, do you mind replying to the, whatever the main issue for this was, the yarn issue, discussing this with a short summary of what you were just saying, like, these are the 3 hooks, blah, 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 this is what we would need to allow for proxying, blah, 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 just as a quick summary, and then maybe Mael or Jonas, if either of you wants to tackle writing some kind of design doc. If you look at the loaders repo, there's, let me find the link. So off of the home page, there's a link to this file. Which is really just a design doc for chaining. And I'd already been talking with Jacob about renaming this to calling this something like, design doc 1 for chaining, and he was going to write an alternate design for chaining. But we could have yet another design doc for like file system hooks or whatever we want to call this. And it could also just go like in the same folder, and we could link to it from the README. So then like the PR that adds this other markdown file for the file system hooks design doc could be where we discuss like what that design should be. Does that work for you guys?
I guess
So it's
the
what do you
idea
want
would
to?
be to go with the file system hooks then, instead of trying to expose utility methods. It seems like.
I think we also need to expose utility methods, because there's going to be lots of other things besides file system calls that you're going to want to not have to like re-implement yourself within your hooks. So I think we would.
The problem I mentioned at the beginning about just replacing the bare identifier parts, or just replacing the extension, or there are some part of the resolution that we want to inject, but not in everything.
Yeah, I mean, that could maybe be another design doc, would be like, what would the utility functions be that you want exposed? And it might mean that we like take something that's currently one function inside the node loader and split it into, multiple functions in order to expose smaller bits as utilities. Say if there's a large function that includes file system calls, we could break it up into separate chunks where one chunk has the file system calls and another chunk doesn't. You know what I mean? Something along those lines. But we should figure all that out in a design doc of like, what do we want the utility functions to be? How do they correlate to existing code inside the node loader? Like, okay, in resolve.js, this line to this line, or this named function in resolve.js, expose that to user loader code, and here's what its signature should be. Something along those lines. Like, we should write it all down, and then someone can implement the PR. So, would you agree with that?
Yep.
And Jonas, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I've done experiments, so I know what I would call into. I could write that down somewhere. You wanted this in this format of the design doc?
Yeah, I mean, this is just write it in as just, I mean, the design doc that I linked is not that long. So it's whatever, 140 lines. So it's like, just enough detail that someone knows what they need to do. Like, you don't need to write some kind of formal, whatever, 20-page design doc like companies would want or something like that. It's just enough that
explaining the problem and how it would
explain it in enough detail that if someone who wasn't on this meeting were to write the PR for it, they know it needs to be done.
Okay.
But not any more detail than that, I guess.
I can write something down. Sure.
And I guess the same would go to you. If that could be a PR into the loaders repo with a markdown file, then we can, that PR that adds the markdown file could be where we discuss it and iterate on like, nailing down the design.
Okay.
I started on the alternate one that you mentioned earlier, and I was thinking to make the current design document a sort of like index type page that would kind of describe higher level things, because I think
Sure.
there's some
I mean, if you want to do
commonality
like a
things.
separate PR, that's just a organizational thing that makes a new design docs folder or whatever, then maybe maybe we could do that first and we just merge that in, and then we have a place for all these others to land or to target rather. Okay.
I have one more
Um,
question if you have the time. It's just about when you do the resolve, you can return a format hint in the new hooks, and that will go into the load, and you can respect that if you want to, or you can just skip it. So that way you can pass information from resolve to load, I guess. Would it be possible to pass some other state that if you during the resolve, I will encounter the tsconfig file that actually is associated with a particular TS file. And then when I load it, I want to load it accordingly to the tsconfig file. So then I would need to, if I cannot pass that from resolve into to load, I would need to run that code again to figure out which tsconfig file it is. So.
Yeah. I mean, my first question would be like, if you defined both of your loaders in the same file, the way that like all the examples are, could you like, and I don't know if this is possible, but could you pass from one hook to the other just by defining a variable outside, like
global,
let
like a global state where you cache it?
Well, like imagine your hooks are all in like, you know, hooks.mjs, and then you put at the top let tsconfig, and then like export async function resolve, export async function load, and they both access this tsconfig variable that was defined outside. I think the first question would be, does that work? And if it does, then the question would be, okay, well, why would it be explicitly being passed? Like having it be explicitly passed from one to the other gives you the benefit that then like other hooks in the chain could modify it if they know what to look for in some kind of context variable or whatever. But maybe we don't want that. I don't know. If my idea doesn't work, then it's like, okay, then we need this because there's no other way to achieve it.
I think it will work. My first thought is not global mutable state because I'm more a functional.
Well, it wouldn't be global. It would be scoped
like modular
to,
state.
Yeah, it would be scoped to your module of like the hooks.mjs file.
Yeah. So
because you're just doing like let tsconfig, not like, you know, global list.tsconfig.
I'm already doing that because I'm caching some of the, because you get resolve get called a lot of times, but I don't want to work out the tsconfigs all of those calls. So I need to.
Well, and you don't want to make, there's no reason to make two file system calls for the same file. So yeah, I agree with you that we should have some way of doing this. I would just say like, let's start with like, is it already possible before we jump to designing
there's
API.
multiple ways to do this already. You can already leak information between loaders multiple ways.
Are you thinking like the post message thing?
You can do a post message. Yeah, you can. We've recently added first class support. Well, no, that PR hasn't landed. That would add first class support for it.
Anyway, I need to get going, but like, yeah, if I would say like, if there's some kind, I think first step is like figure out, I guess, the various ways that it's already possible. And then if for whatever reason, they're all unsatisfactory, that would be like create a new issue with like, well, these are like the 5 ways it can be achieved. And they are all lacking because of blank. So we need this new way that will be better because blank, you know what I mean? So if you can do all that research, then yeah, I think it could get.
I think it works the way you said it, like you have it in the global state. So there you go. Yeah, or in the modular state.
Yeah.
All right. I have to jump, but you guys can keep on if you want. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
There, it's still recording. That's what I was worried about. But yeah, passing state between them, I don't know if we would provide a 0 copy way to do it, if that's the hope. Jonas, are you expecting something to be 0 copy if you pass it between loaders?
Meaning what? I mean,
Basically,
Getting cloned.
whatever goes through the structured clone algorithm. If you applied structured clone when you passed it to the next loader to use where the TS config lives.
so you mean if this is the same pointer to the same object, or?
Yeah, my expectation is anything we provided as first class between loaders that's not done through user space would do a serialization operation. So you could not pass functions, for example.
Ah, okay. So you need to serialize it, then deserialize it, then you lose the memory pointer. So it's not. Okay, I see.
The underlying
Um,
memory may be the same, but the object references and functions
Yeah.
would be lost.
So I wouldn't compare. Probably I wouldn't compare the references, so it wouldn't be a problem, I guess. So it's
Okay.
just like I find some information during resolve that it's costly to get, and I want to kind of get it into load, so I can
Yeah,
use it there. And the
so
information
I'll
is
try
mostly
to
like,
add a test that shows how you can do this with the post message system. In particular, my fear is for a lot of resolve operations, you won't want that data. It'll be just serialization cost for no benefit.
yeah.
And so having explicit ways for loaders to create their own hooks that we don't maintain seems potentially a route we may want to do. So that loaders can communicate with each other without Node caring what they're doing.
Yeah, so you're talking about passing some state between different chain loaders, or?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. For my case, probably will work, just put it in the module state, because I can look it up like a lookup in a global thing, so that would work. It's just a cache, basically, because I can run the same function again and get the same result. So it's just avoid, it's a bit of like memorization or something like that, with a cache.
Yep.
So that will solve it, I guess. I just was curious because you could pass this format thing.
yeah,
in
you
between.
can.
So I thought, could I serialize
Ooh,
something
what can I
into
do
a
with
string
this?
here and pass that instead of the format, and just use that as a kind of workaround? But
If you really want to, you can, and I'm not
Yeah.
going to make
Okay,
any
yeah.
effort to stop you.
Yeah,
okay.
because like we were
I-
thinking you could pass in that it was TypeScript and it doesn't matter as long as the final thing says module.
Yeah,
Right, that was what I was thinking too, because if the format is TypeScript, basically, it will be a good format specifier to get into load, and I can know load it directly that it is TypeScript actually.
yes,
Yeah.
it's meant to be any string you want.
Okay, because in the docs it says like this set of strings, like
Those are the ones that are supported. Maybe we can add the docs that you can use your arbitrary ones.
okay,
I believe it says that. I think it says
Does
it?
the
Does?
value
maybe I
can be
misread
any
it.
string. It's just that its final value must be one of these 5.
It says that you have to implement a load hook if you want to pass that, just to pass it along to Node. But there's like a specification of the API where it's each parameter is says what it could be, and if I recall correctly, there's a set of strings there.
Yeah, there's definitely a table.
Why are these docs split up now? I'm so angry. I'm trying to find where, do we even have the list of supported ones
Yeah,
in the docs?
yeah, in the ESM docs.
I'm not seeing WASM listed. Maybe it doesn't have quotes around it. I bet that's it.
It's
Yeah, it's
under
got
the
single
load.
quotes. Okay, yeah, I see it. Blah, 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 returned. It's gonna be- Yeah, this could be worded better. Yeah, it's okay.
Why can't I? What?
This is the old one.
Yeah, because this says it can be one of the following.
Okay, so
And-
up above in resolve, it says if a format is specified, the load hook is ultimately responsible for providing the final format value and is free to ignore the hint provided by resolve. If resolve
Oh.
provides a format, a custom load is required, blah, blah, blah.
I think this
So
might just
that's-
not be upstreamed because the refactor isn't in the public API docs on the web.
Oh, yeah, I'm reading it from GitHub.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, it's basically saying that, yes, you can provide whatever you want. Just your load hook must return one of those 5.
So it says returns object format. This is to get the new docs, you need to go to master on the Node.js.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, 'cause it's not
they
published. yet.
haven't published a new release. The minor cutoff date is today. So it should be 2 weeks from today. It goes out.
Hmm.
That's when it'll be updated.
It got tagged with backporting. Who's gonna do that?
The backporting team will do it, and I bet you they won't do it for quite a while.
Well, Jeffrey was saying it should happen concurrently with the 16 release.
I don't think the backporting team's gonna do it.
Oh, okay.
Not in
Will
that
this
time.
will this new APIs will they be backported, or will they only be available in 16 dot something or 17 or?
Generally, we try to backport as much as we can, but it gets harder and harder to keep the backports up to date, and eventually we won't be updating. So I think this refactor is going to be backported. Any sort of LTS thing, if we want to unflag, as in market is stable, needs to be backported in some manner. It can still be flagged, but it has to be available in all LTS lines.
Okay. So we need to, because in TS node, I'm working on a pull request to implement the new hooks in TS node. Already has a loader that uses the old hooks, and Andrew wanted it to be backwards compatible. So we need to check the node version and either provide the old hooks or the new hooks.
You can also provide
Actually, you
both
could provide
sets.
all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did that, but I got a deprecation warning that wasn't.
Oh, yeah.
So
True, yeah.
just to make
That's-
the output cleaner, I did the
Yeah.
check. Not really needed, probably, but yeah.
I don't have a good way to do that.
Hmm.
Yep. Maybe we shouldn't give the deprecation warning if they have the new hook on it.
Oh yeah, we talked about this. It was a can of worms.
It is, but anyway, I need to go.
Yeah. Oh, quick question from Jeffrey before we go. Does this time work for everybody?
I don't know. I'm gonna know at my new job in a while.
Oh, okay. Cool then. Jonas, do you know?
Yeah, sure. It works for me in the evening like this. It's fine.
Okay, cool. I think this should usually work for me too. Cool. So we'll wait to hear back from you, Bradley. Also, good luck on your new job.
Okay.
All right. Ciao.
Yeah. Bye.